Okay, so here we are. This is the first lecture in Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is on fiscal policy. Now, in the last chapter, we talked about government and, the reasons that we need government and the good and the bad. But this chapter is on fiscal policies of the government. Now, there are two economic problems we can have, inflation and or unemployment. And to fight these two problems, we have two sets of tools. We have fiscal policies. These are policies of the federal government, and then we have monetary policies. These are policies of the Federal Reserve. So what we do in this chapter is we look at these fiscal policies, and then in the next chapter, we look at monetary policies. And so that's the way this thing is organized. But before we get into the chapters, I've got a couple articles from the Wall Street Journal, from today's paper. This is on the money and investing page. And it says, loans, new degree of debt. Says private lenders offer parents, that's your parents, parents of college students, private lenders offer parents a new product to finance children's college education. And it says Sallie Mae will introduce its version of the loan next month. Parents will be able to borrow at interest rates ranging from 3.75% to 13% with 10 years to pay it off. So student debt is sort of maybe topped out. Student debt is already greater than credit card debt. So now the next objective is your parents to encourage them to go into more into debt for your education. Yeah.
You said that was Sallie Mae, right?
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting. That's what I used.
Yeah. Well, that's the most common. Yeah. So anyway, I thought that is interesting. And then the other article I've got here is major test of $15 an hour base pay. California plans to raise the minimum wage. Will be the biggest experiment on the market. And so we talked about this before, but since it was in today's paper, one of the purposes of this course is that if you were to read the Wall Street and you look at this, well, you'll be able to make some kind of judgment, you'd be able to analyze it a little better and say, well, is this a good idea, or when is it a good idea and when is it a bad idea? So, will this help or will it not? And the answer, of course, is that all depends, right? I mean, is it a good idea and will it help people if we raise the minimum wage from $7.50 an hour, which is the federal minimum, to $15 an hour? And the answer, of course, we have to go back here to demand and supply. Because the answer is that if the minimum wage increases wages above the equilibrium wage, which is where quantity demand equals quantity supplied, then what will be the result? Well, as wage goes up, what happens to the number of people who want to work? It goes up, right? More people want to work at $15 an hour than at $7 an hour, correct? But if you're looking at the demand for labor, this is the supply for labor and this is demand for labor, not milk. We're talking about labor now. With the increase in price, what happens to the quantity demanded as the wage rate goes up? Well, employers are going to want to hire fewer workers at the high wage than at the lower wage, correct? Now, if this minimum wage law increases wages above the equilibrium wage, then the only thing that can result is a surplus. where the quantity supplied would be greater than the quantity demanded. And of course, if we're talking about labor, the surplus is unemployed people, people who want a job but can't, and may be looking for a job but can't find a job. And there are going to be fewer workers working at the higher wage than would be working at the lower wage. Of course, what wage earners are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the low-income people, right? We're talking about the entry-level type jobs. There will be fewer of those jobs. All right, but if the minimum wage, I mean, if the wage is already below the equilibrium wage, and the minimum wage increases it, you see, up toward the equilibrium, then we're not going to get any more unemployment. See what I mean? But the likelihood is that if we increase the minimum wage above the or increase it to $15 an hour, that will increase it above the equilibrium. But it does depend on where it is in relation to the equilibrium wage. Now the equilibrium wage in one city may be different than in another city, and the equilibrium wage in a town may be different than the equilibrium wage in a nearby big city. So I mean these wage rates sometimes are local, but and then the next question is, well, if the increase in minimum wage forces businesses to raise prices, and that's one thing that's they say in this article. It says increasing the minimum wage will hurt the hiring the least experienced, least skilled, and lowest wage workers, and will tend to raise prices. Well, now the question becomes, and this is an economic question, right? This is economics here, an economics course. So if the minimum wage forces business to raise prices, then which businesses will be hurt the most? And the answer is those businesses that face a price elastic demand curve will be hurt the most. And those businesses that face a price inelastic demand curve will be hurt the least. Now, what does that mean? Well, price elasticity demand, elasticity is a measurement of the effects of a change. In this case, the change in wages and the resultant increase in prices. In other words, if a business raises price, two things are going to happen. Number one, fewer people will buy at the higher price, correct? But the business is making more money for every unit it does sell, correct? So every time a business raises price, these two things happen. It loses customers on one hand, but gains more money per unit on the other hand. So which effect offsets the other? Now, a business that is selling something that is necessity with few substitutes, well, it can raise prices, but people will still buy almost as much as they did before. So that business may increase their total revenue. They raise price, people still buy almost as much, and yet they're getting more money per unit, and therefore their total revenue will go up. That's a price inelastic demand curve. But other businesses who are selling something that's more of a luxury with many substitutes, where people can say, well, I don't want to pay that higher price, I just won't buy it all, or I'll buy a substitute. Well, in that case, when the price goes up, yes, the business will make more money per unit, but its sales will go down so much, the volume goes down, that it will lose more money than it gains. All right, and we call that a price elastic demand curve. So you see how economics can answer questions definitively, where there's really no argument, it's just mathematics. See, what effect will the minimum wage have on the economy? Well, that depends on where the minimum wage is in reference to the equilibrium wage. And when the minimum wage causes higher prices. Which businesses will be hurt the most? Those businesses that face a price elastic demand curve. I see how in economics you can analyze these things, and you can there's no opinion here. This is not normative economics. This is sheer mathematics. There's no argument here. All right? And that's the way you should look at economics. At least that should be your goal, for taking this course. So when you read stuff like this, you're not just you've got some knowledge to make an opinion.